Numbers, analytics, data, they tend to scare us football guys. Maybe it's because we're macho. Maybe it's because we're idiots. So who better to explain them than the guy who has created all sorts of ways to use evidence to make smarter football decisions, which you may or may not agree with, Ben Baldwin of Seahawks Twitter.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to say.
You are definitely living in the hindsight world today, Paul.
You got f***ing grow up, mother. Are you kidding me?
Paul Gallant, what the hell is wrong with you?
As I continue to get to know Seahawks Twitter, I feel like I need to bring the smartest person on the platform to the program. And I think that would be very acceptable with a man that was recently described on Reddit as insufferable always, but right often. Ben Baldwin joins me. Ben, what's up, buddy?
Hey, thanks for having me. This has been a fun series so far, and I'm happy to talk on and hop on and talk about whatever we're going to talk about.
Okay, we're going to go in some weird directions, but I think first, I'd like to start with this. I think some people might look at you because of all these different things that you have brought to the table, whether it's EPA, your tier system, you've got a fourth down decision bot, you've got all these quarterback ratings. I'm assuming, though, that deep down you are a fan of the Seattle Seahawks, correct? Because how else would you be in the midst of Seahawks Twitter and have all this power that you have?
Yep, that's right. So I grew up on the east side watching mostly Huskies just because they were like the big thing in the 90s when I was growing up, and then some Seahawks as well. And then I moved out of the state for college, and then after getting a job, I moved to the East Coast. And at first I just like started watching Seahawks games as a way to like still feel somewhat connected to Seattle and my hometown and all that. And I think that's kind of a common story for a lot of people who have moved out of the area and just like want to have some connection to the place they grew up in where they don't live anymore. So I started watching Seahawks games, and that turns out that I really like football and the Seahawks, and it just kind of one thing turned into another, and here we are today.
I know on your Twitter profile it reads Danny's economist friend. I'm assuming that's referring to my co-host Danny O'Neill. I'm assuming that means that you have a background in lots of the numbers, if you will. What led you to first start applying math, numbers, analytics, whatever you want to call it, to football?
Yeah, so that's my background, and my day job is basically applying numbers to inform decision making. So my day job is doing kind of policy researchy stuff, and my background is in economics. And at least when I started out, it felt like there were not a lot of people in the quote unquote football space kind of doing stuff that was like numbers / evidence focused. And like there were a lot of conversations that I thought were kind of missing people relying on, like, I don't even want to say numbers, but like evidence. And like people are just saying things without really backing it up with evidence, but rather saying like, this is right because this coach thinks so, or because people have always thought this way, and tradition says this, rather than like, let's actually look at what has happened in games and see if what people are saying is true. And a lot of times it is true, but a lot of times it's not. Like, for example, making fourth downs, like we now have a great deal of evidence that coaches are not the best decision makers when it comes to fourth downs. And there's this avenue for quote unquote outsiders to kind of make some sort of contribution to understanding how football should be played.
You used a great word there, evidence. Do you wish that you could rebrand the word analytics as something else?
So I think this is definitely a good question, and I understand where it's coming from, where like analytics has just meant this catch-all term where nobody can really define it, and
right.
It's really easy for for people to beat on.
And it's turned into a trigger word of sorts. And I know that I've even fallen guilty to this a couple of times. And I imagine it's got to be frustrating for you. You just posted a series of videos of you watching Russell Wilson. You're not some guy that's not actually watching football, but I think that is sometimes something that lazy people like maybe me 6 years ago would have said, like, oh, look at this guy. Oh, he thinks he knows football. He thinks he watches it. He never played. There's a lot of that kind of alpha, like BS mentality going on. But you are watching things, and there is this fear of the word when the word is not even quite understood.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is like the people that have put the fear into the word, and I definitely not talking about you here, but like the people who are aggressively against this, like whatever you call it, I think they would be against it. Like they have their comfortable football world, and NFL coaches are like the cream of the crop, which they are in a lot of cases for the vast majority of things. And people with other processes or other approaches just don't have any room to make contributions or contradict what coaches are saying about like fourth downs or play action or running the ball, like all these different things. And I think whether we called it analytics or an evidence-based approach or whatever you want to call it, like there's always going to be these people who just defer to what the traditional way of playing this sport is going to be. And like, yeah, we could have better branding, I think, but there's always going to be some sort of resistance to the outsider nerd people.
Maybe you could trick him and call it manalytics or something that just sounds like so laden with testosterone that everyone has no choice but to accept it. I think it's really appropriate that your Twitter avatar is the eye of I believe T1000. Now it's got a cowboy hat on top of it, which I think is very cute, very stylish, very fetch. And I like the idea that there is perhaps a Skynet for football establishment, because there is a part of football establishment that I am just amazed that has not adapted. And you mentioned some of the things, whether it's coaching decisions, the nepotism that is rampant throughout, where guys are going to bring guys that they know onto their coaching staff, and also a fear to break outside the norm. I have long been bummed by that. And obviously, if you're going to try to do things in a totally different way, it could backfire on you. Like at first for Chip Kelly, it worked for a little bit with the things that he were doing, which was different, but then sort of ran its course. He had a bit of an ego himself. Defensive players were, I think, a little bit tired with the amount of snaps that they were playing. There's a number of factors that maybe didn't work out, but I wish there were more people that would take it outside of the box as opposed to doing seemingly the same old. And, you mentioned it with the fourth down thing. And I'm still struggling to understand Pete Carroll's decision on Sunday to punt the football there. Also, that awful hut 35-time leading up to a delay of game thing. I'm still mad about it. I'm more mad about that than Russell's bad interceptions. And you would think that some of these guys would look at the constant failure or the things that could be better and think to themselves, why not try this? Why not experiment with some of this, as you said, evidence-based just information that is now at their disposals, because there's so much of it.
Yeah, the fourth down one is really hard because like from the math / nerd / whatever you want to call it side, like it's not that hard of a problem to set up. Like you estimate a team's likelihood of conversion, which it's not that hard because you know how good the offense is, you know how good the opposing defense is. And in this case, like the Seahawks have a good offense. So if you send them out on 4th and inches, then you should expect them to have a decent chance of converting. And then what happens if you punt is a known quantity, and what happens if the opponent takes over after a punt, and especially with the Seahawks defense, like even if you pin the opponents deep, it's not like you have a great chance of stopping them. So that's why Carroll's comments after the game were so frustrating, because he said they didn't want to get desperate. If they had failed, it would have been like a turnover and the Rams would have had a good chance of scoring, but he should know that his defense it's not good. And what happened after the Seahawks pinned them deep was the Rams went down and scored. But for some reason, it seems like he doesn't, like the defense giving up a long touchdown drive like that doesn't register to him as much as failing on fourth down if they even failed, which is like they most likely they would not fail because most teams convert in that situation. And even if they did fail, the defense could make a stop, and they probably wouldn't, just like they didn't actually make a stop after the punt. So it's just like there are some instances where I can like at least understand where he's coming from, but on this fourth down thing, especially with the relative strength of Seattle's offense and Seattle's defense, like it's just so hard to understand.
Yeah, it's as if he wants them to, I guess, still feel confident in themselves. Hey, I'm gonna show that I still have faith in this defense. But I mean, Ben, I even presented him with caveman math that I had put together essentially by actually tallying up the results of what happened after every single Seahawks punt this year when I asked him about it. And 54% of the time there has been a score of some sort. There's been a touchdown or a field goal. And you would think, okay, if maybe I have a greater than 50% chance of converting a fourth down and they have a greater than 50% chance of scoring if we punt, no matter how good Michael Dixon is, maybe that really simple math would be something that he would take a look at and listen to and at the very least think about. But alas, here we are.
Yeah, someone brought up, like someone put together the numbers of even if you look at just Seahawks drives where they pin the opponent inside the opponent's like 20-yard line or 10-yard line or something, like even those drives, the Seahawks defense has not done very well. So like there's just no evidence that you can point to that says if we get off a punt and pin the opponent's deep that we expect to get the ball back without the opponent scoring.
Danny and I touched on the fact that he might have too good of a punter. Like, if you had that poor schlub on the Tennessee Titans, Trevor Daniel, who may be back at FedEx, I hope he's not, that whiffed the punt off the side of his foot last Thursday and had the next one blocked instead of Michael Dixon, who is honestly a legend as far as punters go, maybe they would do it a little bit less.
Yeah, he's a great punter, and they really do pin opponents deep a lot. Like the punting game is everything you can ask for, but like I don't know if he just doesn't. Is the long-term memory not such that like he doesn't remember that just because opponents were pinned deep that doesn't mean that they actually go on to score, because like we've just seen so many drives where the opponent has just marched straight down the field without that much resistance against this defense.
One of the things, and this is not based in any evidence, this is really based on memory and nostalgia, which means it's probably flawed, but I feel like in the olden days of the NFL or 10 years ago, that maybe even 15 years ago, if a team had the ball in its own one, it was a dangerous situation. Now I don't really feel that way. I feel like there are so many things that the offenses can do now and so many different ways that offenses have adapted, quick ways to get guys the football so that they can get to the line of scrimmage and get past the 1 yard line, the 2 yard line, the 3 yard line as quickly as possible, that you're not in as much danger as you maybe would have been 10, 20 years ago. I don't know if you feel the same way. That is legitimately just a gut feeling that I feel like is right.
No, I think that's right. It used to be like teams would just, if they were pinned at the one, they would just come out and run into a wall 3 times in a row and hope that it wouldn't end in a safety, and then punt the ball back and think that like if they're able to get off a punt, then that was successful for them. But that's not really how teams operate anymore. And we've seen this shift in how football is played, where teams are much more aggressive and the value of field position just isn't that much because teams can move the ball so effectively now.
You've done a lot of really, I think, cool things and have been involved with a lot of just different ways of looking at football. I'm trying to figure them all out as best I can on the fly. EPA is fascinating to me. I remember a while ago, while growing up, there was this website called coldhardfootballfacts.com. It was run by Kerry Byrne. And since I was growing up in the greater New England area, he was a bit of a Patriots homer. So I enjoyed that website a lot because he also would kind of go after the people that were calling out Bill Belichick and all that. But on that website, he would constantly preach the importance of yards per attempt as a way to gauge quarterbacks. So I remember looking at that and thinking, okay, yeah, this means more than yards. This means more sometimes than touchdowns. Definitely not more than interceptions, but interceptions are down so much. EPA is an entirely new way, and I imagine a highly, compared to yards per attempt, much more detailed analysis of what makes a quarterback good. What goes into it? Like, how did you come up with this formula to determine how it works? Because if you take a look at the rankings of the quarterbacks that you put up, honestly, I feel like they're pretty accurate at the very least, just based off of, again, gut feeling and watching these guys a lot.
Yeah, so taking a step back, so EPA is expected points added. So we have to take a step back and say, okay, what is expected points? And expected points is basically a way of quantifying the value of where somebody has the ball at a given down, distance, and yard line. So if you have if you have first and goal at the opponent's 1, that's a much more valuable spot than 3rd and 20 at the 50-yard line or something like that. So we start with expected points, which basically assigns a point value to every play based on where the team with the ball has the ball. And the idea is to just have kind of this simple number quantifying the value of the spot on the field. And then expected points added is just for every play, how much does that play improve or worsen your expected points? And the interpretation of the number is if you have 1 EPA, then after the play relative to before the play, you're expected to score 1 more point than you were before. And that, I think that'd be something maybe like a 15-yard gain on 1st and 10 or something, like without looking at the numbers. And to be clear, this wasn't my formula or concoction. It was just something that someone came up with, and is a very good idea. You
normalized it, though. I mean,
a lot of people have done.
Right, and at some point, I imagine you guys were having these conversations online, maybe, and you saw like this is a pretty accurate way to gauge what you're seeing out there. And sometimes it is nice to have numerical data to confirm or to disprove what you think you're seeing. One of the things that has driven me crazy that you constantly post about, but you're right, has been what we've seen out of Ryan Tannehill for the last year and a half. Now, I can't stand Tannehill. Part of it has to do with the fact that I have a lot of friends who are Aggie fans, and I just thought he sucked in Miami. Part of it also has to do with the fact that I think Tannehill, going back to his time in Miami where he got mad at some practice squad player who dared to intercept him and started yelling at him, I just thought he was totally soft based off of that. And the other part of it is that I hate Tennessee Titan fans with a passion that I imagine a lot of former Sonics fans hate Oklahoma City Thunder fans. I can't stand them. They stole the team from Houston, blah, 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 blah. But EPA and the numbers that you put out there have shown that Ryan Tannehill's pretty good. And after refusing to admit it for a really long period of time, then I started watching him and I'm like, man, I don't think I can dismiss this guy anymore. It's the most frustrating thing ever, Ben. So I guess thanks for that. Thanks for making me see the truth in a really frustrating way.
Yeah, Tannehill's really interesting because it really shows like how hard it is to account for the circumstances surrounding a player. Like, we could have watched him with the Dolphins and been like, this is a terrible player. And that's pretty much what everyone assumed. But we've seen him in this different environment and he's been really good. And it's also hard to say that it's only because of this environment, because we saw Marcus Mariota in the same environment be very bad. So like all these things are like it's the fun part of football. And from a like numbers-based approach, it's the hard part of accounting for like how important is coaching, how important are surrounding players and receivers and offensive line and all that kind of stuff. And Tannehill is like even now among the nerds, it's kind of controversial about like how good he actually is versus like helped by the scheme and all the play action and AJ Brown and like all these different things he has going for him.
Derrick Henry.
So, Derrick Henry too. So if you want to say that Tannehill is not that good and is elevated a lot by his supporting cast, then there are still a lot of people who would agree with you there.
I want the bottom to fall out, but sometimes you have to give up the good fight. Your NFL tier system is something else, and I talked about this on the last episode with Evan. Mm-hmm. I look at it. It is such an interesting looking chart. I'm not the smartest when it comes to these charts on the X and Y axis. The days of my good SAT score with math was a long time ago. So now I'm a general fraud when it comes to how that comes to be. But I find it pretty damn accurate. How does that come to be? What are the most important factors when you're putting those things together?
Yeah. So for people who haven't seen this, it's basically a chart with offensive EPA per play as one axis and defensive on the other axis. And aside from that, the premise is that if you're trying to predict how good a team is going forward, then offense is much more predictive about future play because offense is much more stable over time. So teams, a team with a great offense and a bad defense would historically at least will perform in the future better than a team with a great defense and an average offense. And that's just because a great defense is so much harder to sustain. And we saw examples of that. Like last year, for example, the 49ers and the Patriots were just amazing in the first half of the season, and then their defense kind of came back to earth. And even this season, we've seen that with Tampa Bay, where their defense was lights out and then just got lit up by the Saints. I think that was last week. So this tiers graph basically assigns a weight to offense and defense and gives kind of a little boost to teams that are one-sided in favor of offense. For example, the Seattle Seahawks and the Tennessee Titans that we've discussed already. The Bills are another example of this, and they're
all the same. I saw that on the chart. They're like this weird,
yeah. So those three teams
figure.
are basically overlapping, and they get a little boost relative to teams that have average offenses and good defenses. And teams like this are like the Ravens and the Colts, where they've had really good defenses, but we might not expect that to continue going forward. And their offense has been sort of a question mark. And for the Ravens, that we have a very stark recent example with that Sunday night game.
Yeah, that one. Oof. I feel for Lamar Jackson, but man, it's the proof has been there for a bit. And what they have to win a game according to one formula. And if you continuously find yourself down one score, it's a shame. I don't want Bill Polian to be right. Bill Polian's the worst. He ruined the NFL. I don't think he's right either. I think that was so dumb to say that he's a wide receiver, especially with what we saw last year. But there's something going on there, and I really do wonder what it is. We talked.
Lamar is definitely an NFL quarterback, I think, and like this is what people were saying after their playoff loss last year, was that they had trouble playing from behind, and that's why it's so confusing that they didn't draft any wide receivers or invest in that position, because they really haven't helped him in that way.
You would have thought Antonio Brown was the obvious one, and I don't like Antonio Brown at all, and I've been very loud about how I don't want him in the NFL again. Mainly, my rationale for him is just screw him. Like, it's not, he just seems like the worst, so bye. But that was, I think, a common sense ad for them, and yeah, you're right, why they didn't add anybody. That's an interesting one, and they are moving in a bit of a different direction now that Ozzie Newsome is gone. The numbers, analytics, whatever you want to call it, community, this is the one thing that I have always had a tough time wrapping my head around. But I do understand it because I think part of it has to do with some of the contracts that these guys get. It does feel like the modern football analyst that is taking numbers into account hates running backs. Why is that the case?
Yeah, so that I totally understand why it feels that way. And a lot of this is self-inflicted on behalf of, of the numbers nerds. Yeah.
And there's a tone with which you do it. And look, I have, now that I've come to just be around it for a while, I'm actually starting to enjoy it. But I also know that I used to not enjoy it. And there are sometimes some flashbacks where I'm like, wait a second, though. Derrick Henry's really good. Wait a second. Josh Jacobs is really good. Dalvin Cook's really good. And then Dalvin Cook plays the way he did last night. And there's evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, so this is kind of one of the earliest findings of like quote unquote the analytics people. And this was way before I was even like anyone even knew who I am or knew who I was or was writing about football or anything. But people found that like on average, highly drafted running backs don't perform any better than late drafted running backs. And this kind of went on to like the the value over replacement level of running backs just isn't that high, so it doesn't make sense to invest at the position, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is actually how Danny and I first talked, was before the 2018 draft. The Seahawks had the number 18 pick in the draft, and I was like, the Seahawks should not draft. Number one, the Seahawks should not draft a running back with the first round pick. Obviously, they did not listen to me because they drafted Rashad Penny, which has probably not gone very well. And then number two was that the Giants should not draft Saquon Barkley at number 2 overall. And at the time, that was seen as crazy because Barkley was like, everybody called him the best prospect in the draft and like a generational running back prospect, et cetera, et cetera. And like the football people just thought that this was insane. And like the views about running backs were just like wrong and heretical and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if the nerd community sounds like overbearing on this point, yes, we could absolutely do a better job at this, but it's also in part a reaction to like just how strong the pushback was at the time we were initially making these arguments.
And that's fair. And a lot of those arguments are sometimes sort of founded in the same thing that, to make a musical reference, this is one of my favorites, Tevye at the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof. They sing this tradition, and there's this one point in this song, and I think this applies to just about every old school person in football, where he asks the question, a lot of you are probably wondering, where does this tradition come from? The answer? I don't know, but it's a tradition. And it sort of has kept through the years, whether going all the way back or into where we are now. The argument that I would make, and this is a weird argument, I have always thought that while it's probably not the smartest thing to do to draft a running back in the first round, I also feel like if you're going to miss on a pick, the pick that you are least likely to miss on, and you might not have a 10-year player, you might only have a 4-year player, but I've always felt that of all the picks in the first round, or maybe in the second round, running backs generally seem to be massive failures the least. And while I'm too lazy to put this into an article and do all of the work on it, I feel, for the most part, that I'm somewhat right, and that you're getting usually productive players if you're finding those guys in the first round, but look no further than drafting Leonard Fournette as opposed to drafting those quarterback options that Jacksonville had. I understand the argument. There's just a part.
Yeah, there's also Rashad Penny, Sony Michel, Kerryon Johnson.
Yeah,
like all those
Nick
people
Chubb,
were
though,
in the first.
But you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Nick Chubb has been awesome, but when he was injured.
Mm-hmm.
Was Cleveland that much worse when Kareem Hunt was in the lineup instead?
That's a good question. Probably not.
Were the Panthers that much worse than when Christian McCaffrey missed time?
That's the other part of this that I wonder about. Having an above average to good running back with an above average quarterback, you don't see the difference. I think we've learned now that you can't win on the feet of a running back alone. You need to have a plus quarterback. And I think that some of these guys are in situations where the quarterback's just not that good. Now, I guess the counter argument to that would be Ezekiel Elliott with the Cowboys, where there have been some really years of unbelievable success. And part of that might be just the fact that Ezekiel Elliott doesn't exactly seem to take the best care of himself and maybe is a bit of a, to be polite, well, I guess it can't really be polite. The guy does not make smart decisions. How about that? Yeah. But I see where you're going with that one. And I sound like I'm falling on the sword on this argument. I think that in certain situations, though, like someone like Christian McCaffrey, he was stuck with Kyle Allen last year. Kyle Allen stinks. He's with Teddy Bridgewater this year. I don't think very highly of Teddy Bridgewater. I know that he is not awful, but I also don't think he's a whole lot more than that. And I wonder if a lot of these running backs were to find themselves in situations where they actually were next to someone like Patrick Mahomes or someone like Russell Wilson, and I guess you could say that about Rashad Penny, like the super elite prospect running backs were the guys that you consider to be unicorns, of which I think there's like maybe 8 or 9. Henry, Cook, McCaffrey. You can put Barkley in there if you want. You can put Elliott in there if you want. I really like Josh Jacobs. There's others off the top of my head that I'm forgetting. But I do think that a lot of them are held back by the quarterback that's with them. Sadly, you guys have better data to shove in our faces about it, and you do it in such a smarmy fashion that I'm like, damn it, I can't do anything about this one.
Yeah, the running back one is it's really the one where like we're the most obnoxious.
I don't blame you. I don't, because some of the people that are fighting back are annoying with the way that they do it, and I think that's one of the things that we have learned about all things disagreements in 2020 in the last couple of years is that we generally can't come to some sort of mutual understanding in the middle. Instead, we like to throw rocks at each other and laugh. At least we're laughing,
that's
I guess. How would you sum up Seahawks Twitter in one word?
Oh man, one word?
One word. This is the challenge for everybody.
I'm trying to think. This is actually really hard. Obnoxious is probably a good word for that too.
Okay, that's a fair one. That's a fair one. I will say when I first came in, and this is one of the tricky things too. Like I've only been here a year. I feel like I'm on top of this team. I'm still learning as best I can about the old teams and just trying to not be a total know-it-all, because I don't think anyone wants some guy to come out of town and be like, actually, this is how things are, and this is how things are. And I did that in Houston. So that was a mistake I made 8 years ago as a 22-year-old idiot. But I could definitely get that vibe. And I remember at first, the thing that struck me, if there's a way to combine the word obnoxious with a real arrogant feel for intelligence, that would be it. And I kind of like it now that I've been around it for a little bit. Like, oh, I'm smarter than you because I watch the Seahawks. I think it's a nice mentality to have.
Yeah, I hope that it doesn't come across as arrogant, although I understand how it does sometimes. But I think like that's something that I really feel that the nerds should make an effort to not portray. Like being able to work with data and like analyze numbers and look at evidence. Like none of this should be tied to intelligence. I think like I really think that coding and data is something that like anybody can learn if they put in the time to it. And it's not really something that like smart people do and dumb people don't do. Like it's something like, especially in 2020 and moving into the future, like it's just like such a big part of life and business and everything that like I don't think it should be something that is used to like close off doors to people. So that's my little spiel on that.
I like that. That's how we can hawksplain the old guard into adapting the way. Who is your favorite follow on Seahawks Twitter?
On Seahawks Twitter, I'm gonna say I'll say Jason Cheathawks. Oh, although that's his account doesn't even exist anymore. So whatever his account is now.
That's the second person, because Jackson said his same thing. He gave a guy that no longer exists.
I should change my answer so that doesn't go to my head. Maybe I'll say Zach Whitman. That's another good one.
Ooh, okay. All right. So Zach Whitman might need to be the next guest, because there's been a lot of Zach Whitman hype. So we'll have to get there. Yeah. This is your chance. Oh, go ahead.
Zach is awesome. He's way more personable than me, so he'd be a much better guest. Zach is great.
This has been fun though. Who's your least favorite follow? And this is your chance to roast somebody for no reason.
I'm gonna take up the Fifth Amendment on this one.
So that means there's some legit disdain behind that one. That's interesting. I like
people could definitely probably guess.
Really? Oh, all right. I'm gonna have to do some science on this one. I'm gonna give you a random Seahawks hypothetical before I let you hit the road, because this is the other thing that I'm doing. The year is 2031. The Seahawks are now quarterbacked by aging veteran and fan favorite Drew Lock. They face a 4th and 1 at the London Jaguars 40, up 1 point in the Super Bowl with 1:24 left to play. Trevor Lawrence, the Jaguars quarterback, sits on the bench with his long locks flowing in the London breeze. Wait, I guess I don't know where they're holding the Super Bowl. Forget about that side of things. Hoping for a chance against Seattle's now above average defense. Michael Dixon, 36 years old, has 15 punts inside the 5-yard line on the year. 4th and 1 with 1:24 to go. What should the Seahawks do?
I think I'd probably go for it.
We're done. Good.
If
Good.
the current offensive environment is so favorable now, then in 10 years or whatever, then it's like they'll probably have like 8 defenders on the field or something, just because of how the NFL is tilting the rules. So I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to get it, and then we're going to win the Super Bowl.
Yes, that's the only right answer too. I'm still mad. I'm still mad. If you can see behind me in my apartment, I legitimately was pacing around it, trying to figure out what are they doing? Are they really challenging? Are they really challenging a spot of the ball? Are they really going to do this delay of game stuff? Are they really punting? I'm struggling with it. I hope that this is not something that happens again in Thursday Night Football. Ben Baldwin, at Ben B. Baldwin on Twitter, The Athletic Seattle, opensourcefootball.com. Anything else that you would like to plug, my man?
Nope, that's it. Thanks for having me. It's good to actually finally talk to you with voices rather than on the internet. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Ben. This was a blast.